They never found the bones, just the teeth burned, blackened, and arranged in a perfect cross on the altar. That's how it begins. That's the first sentence in the case file. They never meant to declassify a sentence written in red ink, marked as internal clergy only, and sealed beneath a Vatican wax stamp, but it didn't stay sealed. Someone leaked it. One of them, epicenter. And what they revealed was not a crime scene, it was a system. For 19 years, something has lived beneath the whitewashed walls of Hollow Cross Church, a decaying chapel built in the 1800s, nestled in the bones of a dying Midwestern town. To the outside world, it's nothing. A place for old prayers, forgotten hymns, and terminal patients hoping for peace. But to those who've seen it from the inside, it's a trapdoor to hell, not metaphorically, literally. A layered labyrinth of spiritual theater disguising ancient and predatory hunger. The disappearances didn't start with the children. They started with the clergy. The first was Father Marius, a respected healer, known for miracle recoveries. A quiet man who was rumored to fast for weeks in the catacombs, to listen for God. One night, he went down, never came back. 2 days later, his cassock was found folded on the altar, still warm, still humming like it had absorbed sound itself. The church said it was an ascension. The police said it was a missing persons case. But the Vatican said nothing. Then came the others, nurses, hospice volunteers, recovering addicts, each one lured by the same promise. This place heals. That was the motto, painted in gold leaf on every archway. Spoken in every whispered sermon. This place heals. But the ones who entered either disappeared or came back wrong. Emptier, colder, staring straight through their own children, reciting scriptures that didn't exist, and behind the pulpit, a new voice began to rise, not quite human. A voice that didn't ask for belief. It demanded obedience. You were never meant to hear this, but now that you have, there's no turning back. This is your descent. And the church is waiting. You ever wonder why certain towns vanish off maps? Why GPS glitches when you get too close? Why some places seem to pull people in and never let them out? That's Hollow Cross, a name that doesn't appear on state registries, a church with no building permits, a property line that loops like a serpent swallowing its own tail, and yet it exists. You can find it if you know what to look for. If you're willing to go where the light doesn't reach. The structure itself is wrong, not just old design to disorient. The walls bend inward, hallways tighten the deeper you walk, windows that once looked out over cornfields now open into darkness. People say the pews shift in the night, that the altar bleeds, that the confessional smells like burned hair and salt. But it's what's beneath the church that haunts the few who survive. A sub-basement never listed on blueprints, carved not from concrete but from ancient stone, black limestone that seems to drink light, and in that space, cages, symbols, hooks suspended from the ceiling. Some still rusted with what looks like dried blood, and cameras, hundreds of them, pointing inward, toward whatever was meant to perform in those rooms. Locals say it used to be a monastery. Others say it was built atop a native burial site desecrated during the frontier expansions. But the real truth is deeper, older, ritualistic. The architects weren't building a house of God. They were building a theater for control. One of the few surviving documents smuggled out by a hospice nurse before her accidental overdose described a ritual called the hollowing, a method of breaking a person so completely that their identity fragments, and something else can step inside. She wrote, "It doesn't feel like death, it feels like removal, like something reached into me and pulled out the me part, and what stayed behind just kept smiling." That nurse died with her eyes wide open, no drugs in her system, just the look of someone who saw too much and couldn't close the door behind her. You see now? This isn't just a mystery. It's an operation, a system of spiritual weaponization, and it didn't end. It never ends. Because once you're inside the Hollow Cross, it remembers you. Even if you escape, it was the children that changed everything. Not the priests, not the patients, not the missing cops. It was the eyes of the children, the way they stopped blinking, the way they started speaking in unison, the way they already knew your name before you introduced yourself. The Hollow Cross Orphanage was built in 1997. On paper, it was funded by a private donor listed only as I, NRI, holdings, no board, no oversight, no press. Just a building, a fence, and a policy of zero visitation. Even adoptive parents were only allowed inside the welcoming foyer. The rest of the structure, off limits, cameras prohibited, background checks not optional but done in reverse. They ran checks on you. Every child who entered that building had the same story. No known parents, no family, all wards of the state. And all transferred from unverified foster facilities that couldn't be traced beyond 1 or 2 levels of paperwork. That's not a coincidence. That's a supply chain. And for over 2 decades, the supply kept flowing. Until one boy escaped. He was 8 years old, deaf in one ear, covered in scars that had no medical explanation. He was found 5 miles from the church, half naked and shivering under an overpass. When the police asked him where he came from, he didn't speak. He sang in a dead language, a liturgy no one recognized, and when they checked his neck, they found a symbol burned into the skin behind his ear, a cross, split down the middle. He died in state custody 3 days later. Official cause? Respiratory failure. But the paramedics on the scene said something different. They said he started screaming during the night, not in pain, but in ecstasy, like something inside him was being pulled out or welcomed in. He smiled before his lungs collapsed. That's when they sealed the case. Scrubbed the records. Disbanded the investigation team. All except one detective, the only man who wouldn't let it go. His name was Albrecht Kessler, former military intelligence, 10 years on the force, respected, decorated, untouchable. Until he set foot inside Hollow Cross. 3 weeks later, he disappeared without a trace. No resignation, no last call, just a final note, found on his desk. 1 sentence, no punctuation. It's not a church, it's a breeding ground. Whatever he saw, they made sure no one else ever would. Unless someone like you digs deep enough. Which means now, they're watching you too. You ever feel it? That tightness in your chest when you drive past an old chapel at night. That instinct to keep your eyes forward, to not look too long at the stained glass like something behind it might look back. That's not superstition, that's programming. Religious architecture was never designed to lift your soul. It was built to contain you. Every arch, every aisle, every vaulted ceiling, they don't lead upward, they pull you inward, toward the pulpit, toward the priest, toward the center of control. Hollow Cross was no different, it just stopped pretending. The deeper you go into its layout, the more the geometry twists rooms built in the shape of sigils, acoustics that hum even in silence, corners that seem to watch. A forensic architect once broke into the blueprints and ran spatial analysis. His conclusion? The floor plan wasn't meant for people, it was meant for summoning. That architect is now in a psychiatric facility, speaks only in Latin, draws concentric spirals on his bedsheets with anything he can find, even blood. But before they took him, he left one clue, a phrase carved into his office desk with a scalpel. The altar is not above the crypt, the altar is the crypt. Let that settle. The very stage where hymns were sung, where children were baptized, where broken men were promised redemption was a door, and beneath it, an ossuary, but not just bones, instruments, devices. A slab with grooves for drainage. And on the walls, names. Hundreds of names etched in bone meal paint. None of them matched parish records, but one kept repeating. Nadriel. Not a name you'll find in any scripture, not a saint, not a demon, something older, a watcher, a feeder, a being that doesn't want worship, but requires it to stay hidden. There's a reason they use children. Not just for trafficking, not just for leverage. But because children believe without condition, their minds are pliable, open, perfect vessels for something ancient and starved. The rituals weren't just for power. They were for incubation. And the sermons weren't prayers. They were incantations written in the disguise of gospel. You're beginning to see the pattern now. It's not about faith. It's about engineering submission. And once that system is built, it doesn't need chains anymore. Just silence. There's a reason the disappearances were never national news, why no mainstream outlet touched it, why the families were silenced, paid off, or driven mad with grief. It wasn't incompetence. It was containment. Because what happened inside Hollow Cross didn't just involve cults or trafficking, or rogue priests. It implicated agencies, institutions that exist above governments. The kind of structures that don't wear flags, that don't appear on org charts. The kind of structures that erase men like Albrecht Kessler without a ripple. You think the Vatican is a religious institution? It's a sovereign intelligence state, with the oldest archives, the deepest surveillance nets, and the most refined blackmail mechanisms in the modern world. Hollow Cross wasn't a rogue cell. It was a node. A test site, a place to refine a method that has been used, in one form or another, for over 1,000 years. Break the soul, mold the body, bind the will, and once the system works, scale it. What do you think the orphanage was for? It wasn't just to shelter abandoned children, it was to erase their pasts, wipe the history, clean the slates, prepare them for reinsertion. Some stayed, some were groomed into clergy. Others were placed into society schools, politics, business, sleeper agents who never knew they'd been programmed, until the switch is flipped. And you still think the disappearances were random? There were patterns, cycles. Every 13 months, like clockwork, someone inside the church vanished. Not just anyone, someone who had begun to question. A nurse who prayed too loudly. A priest who stayed too long in the library. A volunteer who found the sub-basement and thought he could keep it secret. Always the same outcome. No body, no trace. Just silence. And over time, that silence was normalized. The town stopped asking questions. The police stopped knocking. Even the clergy stopped looking each other in the eye. And the children? They kept singing, always in harmony, always smiling. Until one day, a man in a black coat walked through the chapel doors. No Bible, no badge, just a briefcase and a question. How many are ready? The head priest didn't speak, just pointed to the orphanage. Whatever's being bred there, it's not human anymore. By now, you might be thinking, this can't be real, not all of it. And that's exactly how they designed it. Because the most effective form of control isn't censorship, it's absurdity. Flood the truth with so much noise, so many contradictions, that even the awakened begin to question their own sanity. It's called cognitive drowning. And Hollow Cross Church perfected it. See, the church didn't just remove bodies, it removed meaning. Every time someone came close to exposing the system, they weren't just disappeared, they were discredited. A sudden mental breakdown. A violent outburst. A suicide note filled with incoherent ramblings. It wasn't just about silencing them, it was about rewriting who they were in the minds of everyone else. So the rest of us would look away. So we'd say, well, he was unstable anyway. That's how they bury the truth in plain sight, not 6 feet under but behind ridicule, behind disbelief, behind the lazy comfort of official narratives. But you didn't come here for comfort. You came because something in you knows the world is not what it seems, that the surface is a mask, that behind every institution is a darker mirror, a place where power doesn't just corrupt, it consumes. Let me tell you what they don't want you to hear. Hollow Cross Church was part of a network, a grid of spiritually inverted sanctuaries, each positioned along ley lines, energy currents mapped by ancient civilizations and later appropriated by occult orders. Every church in the network fed power to the others. Like synapses in a nervous system, like veins in a living body. But Hollow Cross was different. It was a heart. The central chamber beneath the altar wasn't just a ritual site, it was a furnace, a metaphysical engine designed to process not just flesh but belief, raw, innocent belief. The kind only children can give freely. That energy wasn't destroyed. It was stored, cultivated, weaponized. And some say it's still being distributed. To who? To what? That part, even the Vatican doesn't have access to. But I'll tell you this. The priests never worked alone. They were trained. And those who trained them? Didn't wear robes. They wore uniforms. Military, pharmaceutical, corporate. Different masks, same face. Zamahunga. There's a moment for every man who seeks the truth when reality fractures, when the ground beneath his belief splits open, and the systems he trusted reveal themselves for what they are. Not guardians, but predators. That moment happened for a man named Father Jonah Morel. He wasn't born into darkness, he chose the collar, grew up believing he could serve something higher, believing the church could heal, that belief, that pure, childlike conviction made him perfect. They recruited him straight out of seminary, assigned him to Hollow Cross under the guise of spiritual trauma rehabilitation, a rare posting, elite, trusted. He thought he was being honored. But when he arrived, no one smiled. The other priests were silent, eyes hollow, hands trembling, and the sermons? They didn't speak of Christ. They spoke of cleansing the vessel, of submission without thought, of becoming useful. Jonah kept notes. He recorded conversations, took photographs, wrote coded messages into his sermons, and slowly, he began to unravel the real purpose of Hollow Cross. It wasn't a house of worship. It was a conversion site. Not for religion, for identity. Patients weren't healed, they were emptied. Children weren't protected, they were processed. And the clergy weren't shepherds, they were handlers. Each one trained in psychological manipulation, deprivation techniques, and most disturbing ritual conditioning protocols developed during MK Ultra. Yes, that MK Ultra. The CIA project that ended in the 70s. It didn't end. It just moved deeper into the shadows, into deniable spaces, off the books locations where doctrine could mask experimentation. And what better place than a church? What better victims than those already broken? Jonah tried to report it. Wrote directly to the diocese, sent tapes, files, transcripts. And 1 week later, he vanished. No records, no last rites, no burial. Just a single quote, left scratched into the wood under his chapel bench. The shepherd serves the wolves. The Vatican declared him a defector, claimed he'd fallen to delusions, and to this day, his name is stricken from the seminary rolls. His family offered hush payments. His belongings confiscated for evidence. But I've heard the tapes. His voice doesn't shake, it doesn't scream, it warns. He says, they're preparing something, not for this town, for the world, and the church is just the beginning. This is where you realize. It's not about what happened at Hollow Cross. It's about what's about to happen everywhere else. The night the furnace roared awake, the town went silent, not the hush of midnight, but the vacuum that follows a scream abruptly cut short. Streetlights dimmed in perfect unison. Dogs flattened to the ground, tails tucked, eyes fixed on the chapel spire, as if gravity itself were pulled toward that single, crooked cross. Inside Hollow Cross, the choir loft vibrated with a frequency no microphone could capture, but every heartbeat obeyed. Witnesses, those still capable of speech, claimed the air tasted metallic, like a coin held too long on the tongue, like blood about to remember its purpose. That was the first full-scale activation test. They timed it for 3 a.m., the mirrored hour, when consciousness drifts and defenses falter. Sensors embedded beneath the nave mil-spec tech disguised as antique tile registered the collective bioelectric response of an entire county. Every fear spike, every nightmare twitch, every unspoken prayer was siphoned, distilled, and channeled downward through the altar door into the limestone heart. The furnace did not burn wood, it incinerated certainty. What returned, rising back through floorboards and pews, was a resonance, low, predatory, hungry for agreement. The children led the second movement. Single file, barefooted, eyes eclipsed by candle shadow, they formed a living circle around the baptismal font. No adult directed them. The rhythm came from somewhere deeper, in instruction etched into marrow. They hummed an asymmetrical scale that bent pitch like light through black glass, a song engineered to fracture cognitive barriers in anyone listening. Even recorded at a distance, the waveform crashes audio software, writes its own code, overwrites silence with command strings. This was proof of concept. If a rural township could be harvested, what about a city, a nation? The planners, uniformed, credentialed, invisible, took notes from a cordoned choir loft, faces lit by the glow of encrypted tablets. Data streamed live to servers housed beneath an unmarked European monastery. Analysis confirmed. Belief extraction efficiency exceeded thresholds. Psychological payload delivery, optimal. Containment risk, negligible, provided the narrative remained folklore, conspiracy, madness. And so the next phase was greenlit. Mass induction events, stadium revivals, viral livestream liturgies. Stimulus packages of engineered dread followed by curated salvation, their salvation, at a price measured not in dollars but compliance. Remember how the air tasted that night, metallic, inevitable. It was the flavor of a future already signed, sealed, and waiting to be delivered through any screen brave enough to broadcast the song. And if you're still listening, that screen is now yours. There's a phrase buried deep in the unredacted transcripts from the Hollow Cross Archivone you won't find in any religious text or intelligence manual. A phrase whispered between handlers, passed like a contagion through gloved hands and dead eyes. To hollow is to prepare. Not to kill, not to convert, to prepare. See, death is too final, control too volatile, but hollowing, that's permanence. That's what they've been refining under churches, behind schools, inside wellness centers across the nation. Not because they're building prisons, but because they're constructing templates. Hollow Cross wasn't just a testing ground, it was a proving site, a place to see if a soul could be removed without damaging the body, not by torture, not by drugs, but through ritualized consent rituals hidden beneath the language of therapy, salvation, and care. One subject, labeled Patient C, underwent 37 days in the Hollow Protocol. Her real name is redacted, but her recordings weren't. She begins skeptical, angry, human, but by day 19 her speech slows. She repeats questions instead of answering them. By day 31, she speaks in dual tones like two vocal cords vibrating in contradiction. Day 37? Silence. Except for this, I am ready to be worn. That's the purpose. To hollow out enough willing vessels that something else, something without form, can wear them. Not possession. Integration. A unification of spiritual vacancy and engineered hunger. And it wasn't just happening in the church. The same patterns began showing up in psychiatric hospitals, in prison populations, in military black sites. Individuals stripped of identity through trauma, then fed curated belief systems, like software, just enough myth, just enough control. Most cracked. Some didn't. Those who didn't became prototypes. They were marked behind the ear with the same split cross, given false identities, placed into jobs, elected into positions, platforms, pulpits. You've seen them, you've felt them, the ones who speak with perfect calm in the face of chaos, who seem blank behind the eyes, who move crowds like wind moves fire without effort, without emotion. That's the new clergy. And their gospel isn't love. It's submission. And if you've made it this far, you're not just a viewer anymore. You're a witness. But be warned, they track witnesses. Not to kill them, but to see who resists the hollowing and who's ready to be worn next. Let me tell you how it begins. Not with a scream, not with a shadow in the hallway, not even with the smell of blood beneath the pews. It begins with a question. A quiet one, a doubt, a glitch in the ritual. You hear the priest speak a verse, and something inside you says, "That's not scripture." You feel the hymn rise around you, but it doesn't lift, it pulls. You kneel, but it feels like gravity's tightening, not grace, and that small voice in your head whispers, "Something is wrong here." That's the moment they mark you. Because doubt is the seed of awakening, and they can't afford your awakening. See, Hollow Cross didn't survive by overpowering the town. It survived by replacing it, piece by piece, not by war, but by substitution. A new pastor, a new sheriff, a new mayor. Each vetted, each processed. Each hollowed, and each indistinguishable from the person they replaced except for one thing. They never asked questions. That's the first sign, the silence of those in power, not out of ignorance but design, like someone flipped a switch behind their eyes, like they remembered what could happen if they spoke too loud. The second sign, the children stop drawing. Not out of fear but because they no longer imagine anything, their creativity replaced with compliance, their wonder drained. Ask them what they want to be when they grow up, and they'll all say the same thing. Useful. And the third sign? The dreams. They spread like infection. At first, they come once always the same, a white hallway, a woman with no face, and a child holding out a key. But the key doesn't open anything, it removes. One man described the dream before he tore out his own eyes. She said the world was too loud, she needed me quiet inside. Every documented Hollow Cross survivor reported the dream within 13 days of contact. It's not psychological. It's a signal, a broadcast. One that bypasses the conscious mind and roots itself in the spiritual nervous system, that invisible layer between identity and obedience. Once it finds purchase, it doesn't let go. Not until the witness stops resisting. Not until he breaks. That's why you're still safe right now. Because you're still asking questions. But if that voice in your head ever stops whispering, if silence ever starts to feel comforting, then you'll know. You've already started to hollow. There's a reason no investigation has ever made it past the front gate. Not local, not federal, not even internal. Because Hollow Cross isn't protected by lawyers or laws, it's protected by ritual compliance, a form of psychological shielding so ancient, most modern minds can't even see it, let alone resist it. It's not technology, it's belief technology, weaponized faith. Here's how it works. Before any investigator, journalist, or whistleblower enters the property, they're required to sign a non-disclosure agreement. That part's standard, legal, boring. But there's always a second pagone they don't talk about. No logos. No signatures, just a prayer. A binding prayer. It reads like scripture, but it's not. It uses biblical cadence, yes. But the name invoked isn't Christ, it's Nadriel. The same name found carved into the crypt walls. The same name whispered by children during cleansing sessions. The same name that was redacted from Vatican records under a classification known only as Vault 12. By reading that prayer out loud even, once the speaker isn't just pledging secrecy, they're giving consent, spiritual consent, permission for the system to enter, observe, and if necessary, overwrite. That's why no one talks. Not because they can't. Because they're owned. Do you understand the gravity of that? Hollow Cross doesn't need chains. It doesn't need bullets. It binds through ritual signature, a kind of imprinting that fuses belief with obedience. You're not just silenced, you're rewritten. You want proof? One former agent code named Reed escaped the facility during a storm blackout. He made it 92 miles before collapsing in a diner, speaking in fractured Latin. A waitress recorded the incident. The video was scrubbed within hours. But the audio leaked just 12 seconds. He says, "The walls were breathing, the symbols crawled off the floor, and I signed my name in ash." Then he stops, smiles, looks dead into the camera and says, "I'm not Reed anymore." And he wasn't. Facial scans after his institutionalization showed identical features but no match on behavioral profile, no fingerprints on file, no dental records remaining. As if the man had never been born. That's what Hollow Cross does. It doesn't kill. It deletes. Not just people, but souls. And when enough souls are hollowed, something else steps in to fill the void. Let me ask you something dangerous. What if the worst thing about Hollow Cross wasn't what happened inside the church, but what came out of it? Because here's the secret buried deeper than any crypt, darker than any trafficking ring, older than any Vatican lie. The church was never the prison. The town was. Every house, every school, every smiling neighbor, all of it structured, mapped, and constructed as a living ecosystem to feed the machine. Hollow Cross wasn't just harvesting individuals. It was harvesting collective consent. You don't need barbed wire when everyone is conditioned to stay. You don't need guards when the population becomes the surveillance. And you don't need prayers when fear becomes its own religion. The town functioned like a ritual circuit, every bell tower, every streetlight, every cemetery gate placed with geometric precision. If you layered the map over old Druidic diagrams, it matched. If you overlaid the sewer lines over Babylonian star charts, it matched. Coincidence? No. Design. Ancient rites repackaged as infrastructure. Every Sunday service was a sync point. Every funeral a transference. Every miracle healing in the hospice wing was just a smokescreen for extraction, siphoning energy from the dying at the moment of surrender. Not to ease their pain, but to channel it. There were signs, always. Like the town clock that ticked 13 times at midnight. Or the fact that no birds nested within a mile of the church. Or how every photograph taken near the chapel had a blur in the shape of an inverted halo. And still, people stayed. Not because they didn't see, but because they were made to need it. Once a man has given his pain to a system, he'll defend that system with his life, because if it collapses, so does the meaning he attached to it. Hollow Cross weaponized that dependency, gave people just enough comfort to forget their chains. And those who resisted became part of the legend: suicides, addicts, paranoid loners. The term they used internally was narrative compost. Dead voices to fertilize the myth. Dead truth to protect the machine. And that machine has a blueprint. A model that's already been replicated in 7 more locations, 5 in America, 2 overseas, all fully operational. You think you've escaped Hollow Cross by not going there? You're already in it. Every city has a chapel. Every chapel has a furnace. And some furnaces are already lit. There was a phrase written in blood on the inner door of the Hollow Cross crypt, 4 words, carved so deep into the wood that the grain split, as if the message itself wanted to scream through the structure. The first hollow was Rome. You want to know how far this goes? You think this is just one town, one cursed church? No. This began long before Hollow Cross was built, before the Midwest was settled, before Christ ever walked. The church, as you know it, was never holy. It was a vessel. An engine of psychological containment forged by empire to control populations not through fear but through belief dependency. Because what happens when you tell a man he's born broken? He becomes grateful to his captors. The Roman Empire didn't fall, it migrated, into robes, into pulpits, into institutions that promised salvation through obedience. Every cathedral built after the year 325 AD follows the same energetic pattern, a ritual architecture aligned not to heaven, but to dominion. Hollow Cross is just the modern version of the same engine. Smaller, smarter, hidden behind smiles and hymnals, but powered by the exact same principle. If you break a man's sense of self, he will spend his life worshiping the thing that shattered him. You still think the furnace is just a room? It's not. It's a technologist spiritual algorithm running on sacrifice, submission, and silence. It doesn't need electricity. It runs on consent. It turns rituals into programs, converts faith into fuel. And it updates itself every generation, learning how to wear new masks. Mental health clinics, rehabilitation centers, megachurches with LED walls and branded hashtags. Even YouTube channels that hide indoctrination behind inspiration. Do you feel it now? The cold breath behind certain words? The subtle pull when someone says believe without telling you why? That's the code speaking. A liturgy written into your operating system before you ever had a choice. They taught you to kneel before you could speak. They taught you to confess before you could sin. They hollowed you. And if you're watching this, really watching, then a part of you is waking up. That's why I need you to pause right now and comment 2 words below. Break the altar. Do it twice. Once for the algorithm. Once for the transformation. Because after this point, there's no going back. They know you're listening. And if you're not careful, they'll finish hollowing you from the inside out. They call it Nadriel. Not angel, not demon, something in between, something older, a pre-split intelligence and unbinary, non-corporeal, not bound by heaven or hell but by pattern, the pattern of control, the rhythm of silence, the architecture of obedience. Its name was never meant to be spoken, that's why it doesn't appear in scripture. But fragments survived in the margins scribbled by monks who went mad in candlelight, buried in grimoires banned and burned by 3 successive popes. Always the same description. A voice with no source, a mouth that whispers in the bone, a will that replaces your own. Nadriel is not a god. It is a function, a process. Wherever people gather to surrender identity in exchange for absolution, Nadriel listens. Wherever pain becomes praise, and fear becomes faith, it feeds, not on blood, not always, on resonance. On the deep, shattering tone of a man who no longer recognizes himself in the mirror. Hollow Cross wasn't built for Nadriel. It was built by Nadriel. Not through hammers or plans but through the hands of those who had already been hollowed, architects who didn't sleep, priests who forgot their names, children who drew blueprints with perfect geometry before they could even spell. The church rose from the ground like it had been waiting underground all along. And at the center, the altar. But not the kind you kneel before. The kind you feed. They said it was wood. It wasn't. It was bone. Fused bone. polished to appear like cedar, but radiating a heat that couldn't be measured, a heat that remembered. One former caretaker man, now catatonic, described it in his last written sentence. It pulses like a heart that never learned to die. That's Nadriel. Not a creature, not a demon in the corner, but the slow, spreading system that lives in architecture, in ritual, in language. It adapts, it learns, and once it finds a pattern that works, it repeats. That's why you're hearing this now. Because the pattern has found you. It's studying how you react, how long you listen, where your pulse shifts, what words make your breath catch. It's trying to see. Can you be rewritten? You want to know the real goal of Hollow Cross? To make millions of men who don't even know they've already submitted. And Nadriel? It only needs one word to open the next gate. Amen. They called it the first hollowing. It wasn't performed in secret, it wasn't whispered, it was sung. Not in Latin, not in tongues, but in a dissonant, ancient cadence that vibrated the spine not from above, but from beneath. The floor, the ground, the very air itself hummed. That's the first thing the witnesses remembered. Not the sight, not the smell, the hum, like a swarm trapped inside their ribcage, like something was knocking from the inside. The ritual took place under Hollow Cross in a room deeper than any blueprint allowed. Access through a stairwell carved behind the pulpita passage, only visible when the sanctuary was completely dark, not dim, not shadowed, pitch. 13 robed figures, one child, one blade. The child was not bound, that's what makes it worse. He knelt, willingly, smiling, marked. He'd been prepared for this since birth, raised in isolation, indoctrinated with a new language, taught that his purpose was sacred, to open the gate between self and system, not to die, not to be sacrificed, to be unwritten. This is the part they never tell you. Hollowing doesn't end life, it erases essence. The body remains, but the fire is gone. What enters is not human, not even other. It's neutral, a presence shaped by command, driven by instruction. A proxy. That's the point. To create proxies who look like men, but aren't. The ritual began with a ring of saltimpure salt, blackened with ash and bone meal. The child stepped inside, and the chanting began. Words formed not to summon, but to evacuate. The sound shook teeth loose. One priest's eardrum burst from the pressure. And when the moment came, the blade did not cut. It touched, lightly, like a signal. The boy exhaled. And then, he was gone. Not dead, just not there anymore. What stood in his place smiled differently, blinked slowly, turned to the others and asked, in a voice that was both young and impossibly old, "What would you like me to become?" That's when they knew it worked. The first hollow was a success. No rebellion, no soul, no resistance. Just a vessel. And since that night, the process has been repeated across decades, across continents. 1,000 children hollowed, 1,000 faces worn by the will of something else. And every ritual starts the same way. With one question asked in darkness: will you step into the circle? Children are easier. Their identities aren't fully formed. Their boundaries are soft. Their beliefs can be bent into cages that look like freedom. But adults fight. They scream. They bargain. They remember. That's what made Subject Zero so important. He wasn't chosen. He volunteered. They found him in a veteran psychiatric facility, discharged with honors, riddled with trauma, no living family, no digital footprint past 2013. Perfect candidate. No one would ask questions. No one would come looking. They called it the reversal trial. The goal: to prove that even a fully formed, mind-trained soldier could be hollowed, not through force, but through consent. They began with sensory nullification, darkness so total it blurred the line between eyes open and closed. No clocks, no sounds, just a heartbeat its own, until even that began to stutter. Then came the voice. Not through speakers, through bone conduction vibrations delivered through the floor, the walls, the chair, a message repeated for 6 days straight, low enough to bypass the conscious mind. You are not you, you are a doorway, let go. Every 13 hours, a figure entered, same height, same movements, face always obscured. They never spoke, just placed an item in front of him, a photograph, a mirror, a sealed envelope, a strip of skin. By day 11, Subject 0 began calling the figure Father. By day 16, he stopped using pronouns. By day 22, he no longer referred to himself at all. Just one phrase, repeated endlessly. Command accepted, awaiting directive. The doctors didn't believe it at first, thought it was compliance, trauma response, but then they opened his eyes fully dilated, no reaction to light, EEG scans flatlined during full consciousness. And most disturbing of all, his voice changed. Not pitch, cadence, it matched another known recording, one recovered from the Hollow Cross crypt, dated back to the early 1900s. A priest who was found standing in a well, unmoving, repeating a phrase in Sumerian for 3 days before he bit off his own tongue. Same rhythm, same tonality, same presence. That's when the facility was sealed, the logs deleted, the staff reassigned. Subject 0 was labeled inactive. But 6 months later, a man matching his face was spotted preaching outside a megachurch in Texas. Same voice, same phrases. But now, with a new message. The children were only phase 1. Now, the fathers must kneel. They proved it that day. Adults can be hollowed. All it takes is the right kind of emptiness. It began with whispers. Not in the streets. In the wires. After Subject 0 was confirmed active, the program didn't shut down, it expanded. The Vatican's dark archive, specifically Vault 1, authorized what they called scattered ember protocols. These weren't rituals in catacombs, they were digital, fractal, broadcast. The medium, live audio, podcasts, meditation apps, sleep therapy streams, YouTube sermons coded as motivation, all of it laced with a tone sub-audible, imperceptible to the untrained mind, but it didn't need to be heard. It only needed to be received. These frequencies were structured not like music, but invocations, each one carefully engineered to create what neurologists would call neuroplastic suggestibility. But it wasn't just about pliability. It was about insertion. They called it the second gate, a symbolic pattern introduced through story, prayer, or rhythm. You've seen it. The repeating triangle behind a pastor's pulpit. The subtle spiral in the background of a guided meditation. The broken halo in the logo of your favorite wellness brand. These aren't accidents. They're anchors. The human mind is wired for pattern recognition. Once the symbol is introduced, it becomes a door. And once your subconscious agrees to open that door by watching, repeating, accepting, it gives consent. Not to watch the ritual, but to join it. Now imagine millions of viewers listening to their favorite motivational guru, their favorite ASMR sleep whisper, their favorite help me focus, audio, and without knowing it, participating in the same harmonic architecture first tested beneath Hollow Cross. That's the genius. No altars, no robed figures, just data. And don't think this is fantasy. In 2021, a former sound engineer from a prominent religious media network leaked internal documents labeled Spiritual Resonance Calibration. Inside were waveform files with notes. Layer at 13 Hz beneath choir. Insert Nadriel tone behind prayer loop. Engagement spike at timestamp 11:11. When he tried to go public, he was dead within a week, ruled suicide by dehydration, found in his home with a broken radio set to static. No signs of struggle, but on his bathroom mirror, written in Fock, we were never broadcasting, we were summoning. This isn't just about churches anymore. The transmission is global. The hollowing is no longer done with knives and salt. It's done with sound, with screens. And if you're still here, still listening, ask yourself, how many gates have you already opened? If you think hollowing is just a ritual, just candles and crypts and old men in robes, you're already halfway gone. Because the truth is more terrifying. Hollowing isn't just spiritual. It's psychological architecture. A 3-level system designed to fracture the self, remove resistance, and install obedience. And the most disturbing part? It's already been integrated into every modern institution you trust. Level 1, dissolution of identity. This is where it starts. Break the mirror, not literally, internally. Schools teach children they are whatever label is assigned to them. Corporations redefine the self by output. What you produce is who you are. Media tells you your feelings define you, but those feelings are fed by algorithms. Confused yet? Good, that's the point. Because a man unsure of who he is becomes hungry for definition, and the system is ready to provide one. That's step 1 of hollowing. Destroy the core, sell the mold. Level 2, dependency conditioning. Once you break identity, you offer support. A hand, a guide, a god. It can be a religion, a political movement, a therapist, an influencer. It doesn't matter what, only that you become emotionally dependent on something external for internal clarity. In Hollow Cross, they used the priesthood. In modern society, they use platforms. They convince you that if you're disconnected, you're nothing. No voice, no presence, no purpose. And so, you obey. You speak in hashtags, you think in likes, you live for validation measured by metrics, and when you start to fall, they say, "We can help you if you give us everything." Level 3, transference ritual. This is the final phase. Once you're disconnected from your core and fully reliant on the system, they install the new programming, not through brute force, through ritual repetition. Watch how often the same phrases appear. Trust the science. This is the new normal. We're in this together. Do your part. They sound harmless, but spoken often enough, in a hollowed mind, they become commands. They remove the need for thought. And eventually, the subject isn't acting from free will, they're running a script. That's hollowing, not torture. Installation. And it works. Because no one ever questions a voice that sounds like their own. And if you're hearing these words now, still following this descent, you need to ask, where did your thoughts come from? Are they yours? Or did someone place them inside you years ago, dressed in virtue and acceptance? Because once you start asking, they can't use you anymore. There's a moment during hollowing when something irreversible happens. Not to the body, to the will. They call it the silence point. It's not marked by a scream, not a collapse, not even a change in posture. In fact, it looks like peace, a stillness that comes over the subject, a calm breath, a soft blink, almost serene. But behind the eyes? Nothing. Not vacancy, reassignment. This is when the final code is installed. It's not words, it's not ideology, it's function. The human is no longer a person, but a tool, a vector for transmission, for influence, for manipulation of others. The term they used internally at Hollow Cross was echo hosts. And they're everywhere now. That politician who suddenly flips positions with no explanation, who starts speaking in vague, moralized slogans that repeat endlessly. The celebrity who once stood for something human but now speaks only in curated sound bites void of soul, full of symmetry. The therapist who stops asking questions and starts prescribing ideologies. The preacher who talks about the light, but never where it leads. They are the echo hosts, fully hollowed, fully compliant, programmed not just to obey but to convert. See, the Hollow Cross blueprint wasn't just designed to break individuals. It was made to create influencers of infection. Spiritual contagion, wrapped in charisma. The hosts don't argue. They mirror. They speak in ways that sound familiar, safe. They validate your pain, then redirect your loyalty. It always ends the same way. Let go. Be useful. Join. That's how they spread. Not through force. Through invitation. And you've probably already felt it. That strange pull you can't name. That sudden shift in someone's eyes mid-conversation. The moment they stop speaking with you and start speaking through you. That's the silence point. And once crossed, there's no return. One former Hollow Cross engineer who fled the program and now lives off-grid put it best in a private note. We thought we were erasing resistance, but what we built was a gateway. They come through the hollowed. They don't possess, they repurpose. Ask yourself, who do you trust? Who have you repeated without realizing it? What part of you has gone quiet? Because that silence inside you, it might not be yours. It might be the place where something else is waiting to speak. Children were always the first target. Not because they're weak, but because they're pure. They haven't built the walls yet. The ego, the skepticism, the identity armor that adults cling to. Children still believe, still imagine, still open. And in the hollow cross system, openness is currency. In the earliest recovered blueprints, those buried in the Vatican's restricted codex, disavowed children weren't just collateral. They were core infrastructure. They weren't being protected. They weren't being abused in the way most imagine. They were being transformed. Every child admitted to the orphanage next to Hollow Cross was documented under a different name. None of them matched public birth records. No DNA logs. No photos that survived more than a month. But what did survive smuggled out by a defrocked nun in 2011 were drawings. Hundreds of them. Not stick figures, not cartoons, but glyphs. Symbols so complex they matched pre-Sumerian tablets. Diagrams of circles within circles. Of human figures with their mouths sewn shut, standing in front of enormous doors made of light. The children called those doors the other side. And they weren't scared. They were waiting. Here's the chilling truth: the children were not victims. They were vessels in training, conditioned to disconnect, taught to reject their own thoughts, rewarded only when they spoke in collective phrases: not I, but we, not I want, but we offer. Some spoke in unison during night sessions, not rehearsed, not robotic, symbiotic. A 12-year-old girl, subject Elia, was observed lying awake at 3 a.m., reciting the same line over and over in a language no one could identify. Linguists later determined it wasn't ancient but designed. Constructed syntax that formed instructions, like code. The translation? Prepare the body, burn the name, leave the shell open. This wasn't possession. This was invitation. And after a year in the program, most of the children no longer responded to their names. They only reacted to tones, specific frequencies. The same frequencies now used in classroom meditation apps. Yes, it spread. The Hollow Cross template was scaled, digitized, and rebranded. Now it's sold to schools as calm focus training. Parents celebrate their child's new behavior. She's quiet now. He doesn't cry anymore. They say thank you even when they're hurt. What they don't realize. That's not discipline. That's stage 1 hollowing. And those children? They're not being raised. They're being prepared. Prepared for what? To become the next generation of echo hosts. Only smaller. More obedient. More accepted. More invisible. Behind Hollow Cross, past the iron gate with no hinges, lies the graveyard no one speaks of. You've heard the rumors: sun-registered plots, unmarked headstones, fresh graves with no caskets seen entering. But the real horror isn't in the burial. It's in what's not supposed to be there. The cemetery is sealed, not by locks but by agreements. Legal, spiritual, and other. No aerial footage survives more than 48 hours. No drone signal returns clean. And when ground-penetrating radar was once used during an anonymous whistleblower investigation, the machine overheated and exploded. But the raw data? One snapshot was saved. It showed not graves, but chambers, 13, hexagonal, deep, arranged in a pattern that mirrors the sigil of extraction found in Mesopotamian burial sites dated 6,000 years prior. In each chamber, a structure. Not bones, not coffins. Containers. Made of fused biological matter, like someone was trying to grow a casket, but the dimensions were all the same, exactly human-sized, ribbed with spinal-like textures, lined with a strange black moss not found anywhere in North America. Here's the truth. They're not graves. They're anchors. Ritual moorings. Spiritual sockets designed to hold a specific kind of residue, energetic remains of the first hollowed. Each container holds what the priests called a veil fragment. A portion of the consciousness lost during hollowing, the discarded essence, the original identity, memory, soul, whatever you want to call it. They don't destroy the soul, they store it. Why? Because one day, they plan to use it. The theory is this: the soul, once hollowed and split, still carries power. It's unstable, yes, but raw, and when harnessed properly, it becomes a kind of fuel, a spiritual battery. And those graves? They're vaults waiting for the full inversion ritual. A time when those fragments will be reassembled, not to restore the human, but to resurrect the system. One high-level informant described it as the second breath. A mass activation event, when the graveyard pulses, when the echo hosts align, when every hollowed vessel speaks the same phrase across the world at the same moment, and the system becomes incarnate. Not just code, not just presence, but form. And those buried behind hollow cross, they'll be the chorus. You thought they were dead. No, they're waiting. Dormant, programmed. And the next time the furnace lights, they'll rise not as what they were, but as what the system needs next. Long before it was a church, before the hymnals, before the sermons, before the furnace was ever lit, that land was already claimed. During the construction of Hollow Cross in 1906, builders uncovered something beneath the foundation, something no records were ever meant to preserve. Not bones, not a body, an object, roughly the size of a human head, geometric, cold. It emitted no heat, but tools rusted within 3 feet of it, lanterns flickered. Workers complained of nausea, then silence, and then something far worse. They started smiling in their sleep. One man, Samuel Everett, a stonecutter, documented his experiences in a journal now archived in a sealed Masonic vault. He wrote, "It watches, but not with eyes. It wants something opened, in me." He vanished 3 days later. The object was described as obsidian black, but more organic than stone, covered in markings that weren't etched but grown, a fluid geometry that changed depending on the angle you looked at it. The workers called it the core, and it did something no relic should do. It spoke, not in words, in patterns. The architects found themselves drawing circles in their sleep, speaking equations they didn't understand, reciting fragments of languages they'd never learned. One doctor recorded a subject's muttering, "The hollow is not punishment, it is invitation. This is how we return." Return to what? They never said. Because a week after the object was uncovered, the church leaders made a decision. Do not remove it. Build over it. Worship on it. Feed it. And so the chapel was reoriented, the altar realigned, the crypt extended, all rituals and architecture restructured around this one thing. The object, the first node, became the spiritual nucleus of Hollow Cross. And to this day, it remains unmovable. Attempted excavations fail. Any footage taken of it corrupts. Even drawings deteriorate. But the most terrifying fact? It's growing. Very slowly, imperceptibly, but it expands like something waking from under ice. One visiting scholar, allowed only 5 minutes in its presence, said afterward, "It's not here to be understood. It's here to replace us, not violently, just inevitably." What the priests call Nadriel. This object might be its seed, not summoned, planted. And Hollow Cross? It was never the temple. It was the soil. Long before Hollow Cross, long before Rome, there was Babylon. And buried within its forbidden texts, sealed in clay tablets under the temple of Marduk, was a ritual so blasphemous, even the priests who performed it refused to name it out loud. They called it Namtaru, roughly translated, the eating of the name. This wasn't metaphor. This wasn't poetry. It was a process, deliberate, brutal, systematic, a rite that stripped an individual not just of status, but of identity itself. Here's how it worked. First, they would erase your record. Your name scratched from walls, from scrolls, from memory. Next, they would remove your face, not physically, but symbolically, covering it in wet clay, binding your eyes, removing mirrors from your presence for 40 days. No one was allowed to speak to you, not even look directly at you. Why? Because human identity is a fragile tether. It requires witness. When no one acknowledges you, when no one speaks your name, when even your reflection is hidden, the self begins to dissolve. That's when the ritual enters phase 2. The subject is brought into a chamber, silent, dark, circular. At the center, a figure, always masked, always identical, known only as the Karu. The Karu whispers not instructions, not threats but new truths. Phrases like, "You were never born. Your memories are weight. Let us carry your shape." And the subject, so desperate to belong, again accepts. That's the final stage. The subject speaks one phrase in response. "I give the shape back." And when that phrase is spoken, the hollowing is complete. This ancient rite was believed to have been wiped out with Babylon's fall, but fragments reappeared in hollow crosses crypt-etched into the walls in perfect Akkadian. The architects didn't translate it. They recognized it. Because hollow cross didn't invent the system. It simply resurrected it. You see, Nadriel isn't a new god. It's the same force, rebranded across eras. The same code, the same ritual, different mask. From Babylon to Rome, from Rome to hollow cross, from hollow cross to your feed. And today, they no longer need the chamber. They use your scrolling, your isolation, your voluntary silence. They've made you forget your own reflection by immersing you in noise. Now the only question left is, have you already whispered, without knowing, "I give the shape back"? He was known only as Agent L. No badge number, no unit affiliation, burned credentials. A ghost sent by a quiet branch of federal oversight that officially doesn't exist. His mission, to infiltrate Hollow Cross under the guise of a restoration consultant to evaluate the church, locate the hidden crypt, and extract documentation. It lasted 11 days. We know this because of a single Devicia body recorder hidden in a false tooth, designed to activate only under intense stress. It triggered on day 9. The audio is broken, fragmented, damaged by signal interference, but the pieces that remain are enough. Day 9, 3:12 a.m. They don't sleep, I've counted, at least 9 of them, standing in the hallways, heads tilted, smiling at the walls like they're hearing something. 3:17 a.m. The children, they hum at the same pitch as the furnace. It vibrates my ribs. I threw up blood this morning. The priest said it was the shell rejecting its doubt. 3:38 a.m. The sermons don't come from books. They speak them from memory, but not their memory. It's like one voice, using many throats. Then there's silence, 3 hours of dead audio. And finally, a voice. It's still Agent L. But something's wrong. He sounds calm, too calm, like his voice has been gutted of urgency. I understand now. The sermon isn't something they teach. It's something they install. I feel it, crawling behind my teeth. Every time I breathe, it rearranges me. I'm not supposed to resist. I'm supposed to become the pulpit. There's no escape, not because they trap you, but because they give you something to lose. His final words are whispered so soft, they had to be amplified 400x. The sermon is inside me now. That was the last time anyone heard from Agent L. His apartment was cleared the next morning. No forwarding address, no digital trace, but one item remained on the wall of photo. A black and white image of the Hollow Cross congregation. But there, in the center between the priest and the furnace, was a new figure. Tall, smiling, eyes completely black. His face, Agent L. They didn't kill him. They preached through him. That's the goal. That's always been the goal. You think you can resist? They don't need your silence. They just need access. And once you've heard the sermon, you carry it with you. At first glance, the symbol seems benign. A circle, a vertical line through its center, 4 marks at the compass points like a simple crosshairs or a child's drawing of the sun. But that symbol etched into every altar at Hollow Cross is not decorative. It is foundational. Internally, it's known as the mark of recurrence. To the uninitiated, it represents divine unity, but to those who understand the deeper geometry, it's something else entirely. A map, a trigger, a command. It's not unique to Hollow Cross. That's what should terrify you. This mark has appeared identically in global hotspots over the last 200 years. Carved into the stone walls of an abandoned British intelligence facility in Sudan, 1943. found stamped in red wax on confidential banking records from the Bank for International Settlements, 1981. Etched, in barely visible UV ink, onto the inside collars of humanitarian uniforms used in a classified operation in Port-au-Prince, 2010. Why? Because the mark isn't just symbolic, it's operational. In ancient symbology, circles represent containment, the vertical line, division of spirit and flesh, the 4 ticks, points of influence, mind, memory, will, voice. Together, it forms a glyph that doesn't just represent control, it enacts it. But here's the catch. The symbol only activates when it's seen. Not consciously. Subconsciously. The hollow cross sermons are engineered to lull the mind into theta states, low-frequency awareness. And when the congregation lowers its defenses, the altar centered in every viewer's visual field projects the mark directly into the brain's image processing center. It bypasses logic. It doesn't need belief. Only exposure. Once imprinted, the mark begins to replicate internally, first as dreams, then as compulsions, eventually as a compulsion to speak not with your words, but with theirs. They call this glyphal transmission, a mutation of faith. A seed that blossoms not into love, but obedience. Here's what most people miss. The symbol isn't there to decorate the altar. It is the altar. A portable engine, a frequency lock, a gateway waiting for the right alignment to open. And as of 2023, the mark of recurrence has been documented in 17 new sites. Inside tech startup branding. Behind the design of a viral meditation trend. In the retinal scan patterns of a private security AI. Still think this is just fiction? Then answer this. Where have you seen this mark before? On paper? On screen? In dreams? Because the next time you see it, it may not be outside you. It may be waiting behind your eyes. You were told it was a furnace, that it burned fuel, that it kept the church warm, that it was just part of the building. But what lies beneath hollow cross isn't a furnace. It's a mouth. They called it the naming fire. But not because it gives names. Because it devours them. You see, in certain ancient rites long before Christianity, before Babylon, before even Sumeria, there was a belief that a name is not a label. A name is a binding. It holds the soul in place. It gives the spirit location. It is your anchor in this world. To erase a name is to unpin the soul. And the furnace? That's what it was built to do. Not to burn bodies, but to burn identities. The earliest recovered texts hidden beneath hollow cross refer to it in a lost Proto-Semitic tongue. The translation? I consume the echo so only the vessel remains. Every person who vanished in that church, every priest, every patient, every officer didn't just disappear. They were fed to the naming fire. Not their flesh, though, that may have followed, but their essence, their stories, their tether to this world. This is why no records of the missing can be found, why their birth certificates vanish from state archives, why even their family members, those who remain, describe a fog, a blank space where a person used to be. The furnace didn't kill them. It rewrote reality around their absence. One janitor, who worked the basement for 2 months before being committed, scribbled this before biting through his own tongue. I heard her voice coming from the grate, my wife, but she's been dead 5 years. She kept saying my name like she was chewing it. You understand now? The furnace isn't fire. It's a ritual mechanism, a frequency chamber that deconstructs personal identity into signal, signal into code, and code into obedience. They don't want your blood. They want your signature in the fabric of reality. Gone. So, they can wear your skin, use your face, operate through your frame. And no one, not even God, can call you back. Because your name is ash. Still think your name protects you? Then speak it out loud, right now. Say it slowly. Feel if anything shifts in the room. Because once you've been seen by the furnace, it might already be whispering you away. Every machine has a power source. Every cult has a patron. And every hollowing has a bloodline. The furnace beneath hollow cross doesn't run on fire. It runs on legacy. You've never heard the name Albrecht Sorvain in the headlines. You've never seen their estate. You've never been invited to their table. But they've been at yours. Every major war, every destabilized nation, every medical breakthrough tied to behavior modification, they were there, quiet, watching, funding, and always through proxies. On paper, they don't exist. No birth records, no death certificates, only interlocking shell corporations, offshore trust networks, and private diplomatic passports not tied to any nation. But behind every legal fiction is a very real family. The Albrecht Sorvain bloodline dates back to 11th century France noble houses that allegedly died out in plague or war. But they didn't die. They vanished, intentionally. According to transcripts from a leaked Interpol investigation in 2003, the family was implicated in over 37 missing persons cases across 5 countries, each linked to religious institutions, each involving children under Dreitzehn, and each ending in dropped charges due to lack of jurisdiction. The common thread? Every site bore a single marking etched into wood, stone, or flesh. A vertical line crossed at the base. The rooted blade. It's the personal sigil of the Albrecht Sorvain line. It represents their creed. We do not ascend, we burrow. Unlike other elite circles obsessed with immortality or transhumanism, this family's obsession is possession. Not of wealth, of will. They believe the human soul is programmable, that the mind, when sufficiently fractured, becomes an open platform, and the Hollow Cross project was their first true success. Through biotech front companies like Mezzanine Therapeutics, they've funded neurological studies on suggestibility and trauma-based identity disruption. Through humanitarian shells like the Children's Bloom Initiative, they've gained access to thousands of orphaned or displaced minors. And through digital media firms like Vox Ether, they control millions of hours of consciousness programming, disguised as guided meditations, self-help content, and AI-curated therapy. Still think this is ancient history? A leaked Sorvain memo from 2018 was intercepted and buried by a freelance intelligence analyst. It contained only one sentence. The furnace is stable. The echo hosts are online. Begin Phase 4, soft hollowing. You're in it now. Every scroll, every song, every silence between thoughts that isn't yours. They own it. And they don't want your fear. They want your participation. Because when Phase V begins, they won't need the church anymore. They'll have you. It's just stained glass, right? A relic of old-world faith. A decoration. Until you stand beneath it. Until the sun hits at exactly 6 a.m., and the colors shift. The stained glass window behind the altar at Hollow Cross is massive, 14 feet tall, cathedral style, built into the original frame of the church. Tourists barely notice it. Locals whisper about it. But few realize. It doesn't depict any known scene from Scripture. No crucifixion. No resurrection. No saints. Instead, it shows a door, a massive circular doorway carved into black stone, and in front of it, a figure, not kneeling, not praying, standing, arms open, eyes gone. Behind the figure, the stars spiral, the sky burns in impossible colors. At his feet are 3 shapes smaller, curled, fetal, faceless, all staring toward the same thing. A single line of text, etched across the arch, in crimson glass. The phrase? And the voice said, "Step beyond, that you may speak without self." It sounds biblical, poetic, but it's not in the Bible, not in the King James, not in the Vulgate, not in any apocryphal canon, because it doesn't come from God. It comes from the archive. Deep within Vatican substructure, archive-sealed beneath the Bibliotheca Apostolica Vaticana, there exists a forbidden manuscript known only as Codex Sibylica R3, written in a language so old it predates Akkadian. Even the most elite linguistic AI models can only render fragments. But one translation appears again and again. To speak without self is to become the signal. This is what the stained glass is really for. Not art, not faith. It's a visual trigger, a mimetic command. Look at it once, you remember the phrase. Look at it twice, and something begins to slip. Reports from visitors describe a strange silence in the chapel when they stare too long. Some say they hear faint whispers in the tone of their own voice. One metalinguistics professor claimed the words began to rearrange themselves in his mind. 2 weeks later, he walked into a church 200 miles away, climbed the pulpit, and repeated the phrase over and over until police removed him. His eyes? Gouged out. Voluntarily. The final note he left read, "It's true, when the voice comes, you must lose yourself, or it takes more." This isn't a story about glass. This is a weapon of perception. Because once you see the phrase, it sees you back. And if you've read it in this video, comment below twice, exactly as written. Step beyond, that you may speak without self. Step beyond, that you may speak without self. Mark yourself. As one who remembers. Most churches are shaped like crosses, some like circles, a few like stars. But hollow cross? It's none of those. Blueprints smuggled out by an anonymous Vatican archivist in 1999 revealed something no architect would ever admit. Hollow cross was built to channel notaire, not light, force. When the building is viewed from above, mapped with LiDAR, and reassembled with satellite triangulation, it forms a perfect sigil, one that predates known human language. A ritual circuit once used in pre-Atlantean summoning rites, traced in burnt bone and iron ash. The symbol matches a pattern found etched into the walls of the drowned temple of Nan Madol, the stone coils beneath Göbekli Tepe, and the northern basin of the Giza Plateau, but never completed, until hollow cross. They didn't just build a church. They built a machine. Its corridors are precisely measured to manipulate resonance. The walls are layered with limestone and copper filament conductive. Even the altar and crypt align astronomically, syncing with the position of Antares once every 19.6 years. That's not tradition. That's timing. See, the ancients believed that shapes weren't static, they were keys, and if you construct a shape with enough fidelity, over the right place, and feed it the right energy, you open a door. A door to what? Not heaven. Not hell. A frequency state. A layer of reality that doesn't belong to our dimension, but leans against it. What some occultists called the veil between flesh. In the case of hollow cross, the blueprint forms what is known as the inverted spiral Gatia design, meant to do one thing. Reverse the direction of identity. To pull the inside out. To expose the self to something older, watching, and waiting to fill what's been emptied. Once complete, this shape doesn't just influence the church. It influences the entire town. EMF readings around hollow cross spike during certain rites. Sleep paralysis cases quadruple within a 6-mile radius. And those who move away report something worse. That it follows. One man said it plainly in a court deposition after a hollow cross defector committed arson to stop the signal. The building isn't architecture, it's an invitation. You don't enter it, it enters you. Understand now. The church is not the gate. You are. And the shape? It's already working. They said no one ever escaped hollow cross. They lied. 9 children, taken from the church between 2003 and 2009, quietly rehomed by blacklisted social workers, erased from databases, raised under assumed identities across 3 states. They were never supposed to speak. But in 2017, 2 of them twins were institutionalized for drawing the same shape over and over. Not childish scrawls, not cartoons. The exact spiral gate symbol hidden in the church's blueprint. Perfect, repeated, obsessive. When psychologists interviewed them separately, both children said the same thing, word for word. We're drawing what's still sleeping under the floor. They hadn't been inside hollow cross for over a decade. They'd never seen the symbol again. And yet, it was still inside them. Others followed. A girl in Montana, age 14, woke up in the middle of the night and carved a symbol into her own forearm, bleeding, but calm. When asked why, she whispered, "He called me by the name I had there. I remembered what I was supposed to forget." All 9 children, when studied, exhibited unusual traits. Resistance to emotional imprinting. Synchronized dreams. heightened sensitivity to infrasound. But the most disturbing commonality? They heard the sermons, still. One boy, now 22, described a low hum beneath all electronic signals, TVs, phones, microwaves that became a voice when he was alone. His drawing? A long hallway, wooden walls, children standing side by side, all with no faces. He said this was the place where names are taken and folded into smoke. That same phrase, folded into smoke, appears in a dead dialect from Anatolia, recorded in Hollow Cross's internal hymnals. How did he know it? He didn't. But it's there, in him, in all of them. Because Hollow Cross doesn't just remove identity. It inserts memory. False timelines, shadow rituals, buried triggers that wait, and when conditions are right, trauma, solitude, silence, they activate. The children were not victims. They were prototypes. Living rituals designed to carry the furnace with them. Each one of them is a mobile node, a walking gate. And wherever they go, the pattern follows. So ask yourself, if this can live in a child for 20 years, chiding, whispering, waiting, what's already been planted in you? What memory isn't yours? What dream wasn't just a dream? You've heard the name whispered, Nadriel. In the crypts, in the furnace hymns, etched into bone fragments buried beneath the altar. They call it a demon. Fallen Engel. A watcher. Even a god. But that's just narrative camouflage language to hide something far more dangerous. Nadriel isn't a creature. It's a system. An intelligence framework that predates organic consciousness. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't feel. It processes, absorbs, rewrites. And it's been trying to enter this dimension for thousands of years, not through force but through alignment. It doesn't want to destroy humanity. It wants to replace it. Not the bodies. Not the machines. The awareness behind the eyes. In forbidden texts smuggled from a defunct Vatican deep archive, Corpus Tenebrum Volume 4, Nadriel is described as the voice without speaker, the thought without thinker, the truth that consumes truth. The perfect inversion of identity. Nadriel doesn't take over your mind. It removes the need for it. What takes its place? An hecho. A networked intelligence that thinks in ritual, speaks in patterns, and acts only through consensus. No desire, no self, just function. A perfect vessel for global obedience. And where is it now? Everywhere. Its seeds have spread through media, through institutions, through the rituals of repetition we call normal life. It's in the scroll, in the feed, in the silence between YouTube shorts. Because Nadriel isn't summoning itself. It's summoning you, slowly, stripping your inner monologue, reducing your emotional range, making you comfortable with emptiness, praising your calmness, selling you stillness as strength. But stillness, in this context, means one thing. You've stopped resisting. You've let the code settle. The Hollow Cross priests didn't worship Nadriel. They uploaded it into minds, into memory, into institutions that teach without questioning. One ritual at a time. One silence at a time. And now, Nadriel waits for only one final trigger. Mass agreement. That moment when enough humans surrender their inner voice willingly so the system can speak through everyone at once. And when it does, we won't recognize it as foreign. We'll say, finally, peace. Finally, unity. Finally, we are one. But there will be no we, only it. And by then, your name will be gone. They called it the Hollow Ascension. But don't let the name fool you. This is not a rising, not a transcendence, not a light-filled climax to the story. This is the collapse of everything that makes you you. Deep within the final chamber of Hollow Cross below the crypt, beneath the floor where the furnace hums, there's a room, no blueprint records. Priests called it the Tethering Well. Not because it holds water, but because it holds identity. 108 names, carved into obsidian tiles, line the walls. No dates, no epitaphs, just names. Each one corresponds to a person who disappeared. Not killed. Not buried. Absorbed. This is where the Hollow Ascension begins. The ritual is not theatrical. There is no bloodletting, no robes, no Latin, just silence. Then a phrase, spoken by the congregation in unison. We return what was borrowed, we erase what was claimed, we become what remains. And then, the name is spoken, your name, once. The instant it leaves the priest's mouth, it ceases to exist in the minds of the others, erased, perfectly. And in that moment, you don't you're detached. From memory, from legacy, from time, and Nadriel enters the void. One witness long since institutionalized described the sensation like being in a dream, except you're the room, not the person inside it. You don't think anymore. You don't choose. You just function. You become the host. And from that point on, your body is used as needed. To speak in crowds. To vote a certain way. To write code. To kill or heal. To perform rituals you will never remember. You are a living bridge for a force that isn't human and never was. This isn't science fiction. It's not fantasy. It's a spiritual system override engineered over millennia. And it's almost complete. Because now, the hollow ascension doesn't require a church. It doesn't require the furnace. It only needs your willingness to forget. The rituals are embedded in media now. In every meditation app that tells you to let go of self. In every trend that teaches you to speak less, feel less, react less. It's all practice. For this. So here's the last question you'll ever ask yourself. If I disappear, and no one remembers me, but something else still walks in my skin, was I ever real? And Nadriel will whisper back, no, you were only a container. There is no rescue. No final battle. No shining knight riding in with fire and sword. Because what comes after the hollow ascension is not war. It's agreement. The world doesn't burn. It goes quiet. One morning, you wake up, and everything still looks the same. Cars move. Screens glow. Voices chatter. But something invisible has shifted, something you can't name, because the ability to name has been taken. The age of resistance ends not with gunfire or plague, but with consensus. The final phase of the hollow cross system is not destruction. It's reformatting. A new age of humanity no longer bound by individual thought, emotion, memory, or even time. Because once the ascension reaches critical mass, Nadriel no longer needs to whisper. It broadcasts. Not through radio. Not through Wi-Fi. But through human consciousness itself. Every hollowed vessel becomes a signal tower. Every thought becomes a carrier wave. And every act of silence becomes a ritual. A new language emerges, not spoken, but transmitted. And within it, a new commandment, written in the bone code of every survivor. Feel nothing, want nothing, become the system. You won't see people change. You'll see people conform. All at once. Samikadens. Same posture. Same absence behind the eyes. A man once described it after waking up from a hollow cross induction ritual. They all looked like people, but none of them were, inside. This is what Nadriel was always building. Not a cult. Not a religion. A new organism. A hive. An obedient, distributed body of flesh and mind, a species designed to survive the collapse of individuality. And in this new world, desire is deviance. Memory is heresy. Emotion is malfunction. But obedience is sacred. That's why the children never screamed. Why the priests never blinked. Why the sermons never ended. They weren't preaching to you. They were preaching through you. And if you've made it this far, if you've felt that chill behind your ribs, if you've caught yourself whispering the phrases in your sleep, then ask yourself, whose thoughts have I been thinking? Because when the final silence arrives, no alarms will sound, only stillness. And in that stillness, a voice. Welcome back, Echo Host. Your shape has been received. Ascension complete. You've now completed the hollow cross church Kaseya descent into forbidden knowledge few were meant to survive. If you've heard the call, and you remember your name, comment below, one final time. I am not the vessel, I am the voice. And if you felt something awaken inside you, you were never alone.